Good morning, everyone. My name is Susan G, and I'm Vice President of Communications and Advancement here at Royal Roads University. I'm really pleased to be here with you all today as the MC for this event, and I'm sorry Philip couldn't be joining us. He's not well today, but he really did want to be here. I'd like to welcome Lucy Fowler, today's presenter, who I will introduce shortly. I'd also like to welcome and share my deep thanks to Associate Director of Human Rights and Equity, Diversity and Inclusion at Royal Roads, Alejandro Campos Garcia. Alejandro obviously organized today's events, and we're all really looking forward to it. And a great big welcome to all of you. It's with much appreciation that I recognize that our campus is located on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. It's with gratitude that we live, work, and learn here, where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff all come together. Haishka. Just a few housekeeping items, and then we'll get started. Your microphones have been muted to begin today, but you can ask questions using the chat. There is a dedicated question and answer session towards the end of the talk. Please feel free to leave your camera on or off, whatever works for you. It's always nice to see a few friendly faces when presenting virtually. Today marks the beginning of Pride Week in Victoria, and it's one of my very favorite times of the year. To celebrate, the President has shared a special video looking back at how we've celebrated Pride together on campus over the years. It's been heartening to see those celebrations become more visible over the years, both here at Royal Roads and across the region, and this year is no different. There's a lineup of events happening both on and off campus, from photo contests to a special screening of this year's Pride movie, Someone Like Me, guest speakers, and more. You can find more details on these events on our Pride page, as well as resources and a link to the library's digital display in celebration of Pride. I encourage you to explore these offerings if you haven't had a chance yet. I'm so pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Lucy Fowler, Assistant Professor at the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Education. Dr. Fowler is a Two-Spirit Métis woman and Metis scholar whose research and teaching includes a focus on Métis youth identity, Indigenous education, queer theory, hip-hop, pedagogies, and youth cultures. Today, she'll introduce and discuss Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer identities and the ways these are explored across Canada. She will also share her current research on Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer experiences, offering recommendations on how we can create more welcoming environments for Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer students, faculty, and staff. Dr. Fowler is involved in a variety of local and national groups, including with the Two-Spirit Midship Local of the Manitoba Métis Federation. She also serves on several boards, including the Board of Directors of Two-Spirit Manitoba and Full Circle for Indigenous Education. She's one of the creators and circle of editors of Powhatimic Journal of Métis Thinkers. The open access academic journal focuses on lifting up the voices of Métis scholars, artists, and community members. Everyone involved in the publication, from authors to editors, are Métis, making it the first of its kind in Canada. Just this month, Dr. Fowler was named a top 10 finalist in CBC Manitoba's Future 40 Under 40, selected for her contributions to making the province better for future generations. Lucy, I read that CBC article about the award, and you're quoted as saying we need more spaces where people can express who they are and be welcomed, and I couldn't agree more. And with that, I would like to extend a warm Royal Roads welcome to you, Lucy. We're incredibly fortunate to have you here. Welcome, and we look forward to your talk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan, for that lovely welcome. I'm so happy to be here and speaking with all of you. I see some familiar faces from community in the chat there as well, so it's really wonderful to see folks again. I'm just going to share my screen and do the awkward talk while I make sure it's sharing. Looks okay? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about a lot of different things. I wanted to give a little bit of a brief overview of what I'll be touching on today. So I'll be talking a little bit about who I am and how I got to this place, and a bit about what it means to be Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer. Talk about my own research priorities, as well as some recommendations, as Susan mentioned, for Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer inclusion. It's kind of apropos that I'm part of this gathering this month because it is Pride Month and it's also Indigenous Peoples Month, and just last week was National Indigenous Peoples Day. So I think this is a great opportunity to share a little bit about some of this work that I'm doing. So while you are all here, or many of you, I guess, probably not all, are here from Royal Roads University and from those territories. Thank you, Susan, for giving that territorial acknowledgement. I'm here from Winnipeg, Manitoba, where I currently live, work, and play. Winnipeg is on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Ochirisakoin, and Innuak, and my ancestors, the Métis or the Michif. There's also parts of Manitoba, and my own university, the University of Manitoba, has campuses in other territories as well. So those are really important for me to acknowledge. And this picture here is a picture of Fort Garry, which is just outside of Winnipeg. Some of you might know a little bit about that history, but this is the place where Treaty 1 was signed in 1871. It's also called the Stone Fort. And a lot of the history of the province of Manitoba kind of centers around this place. This fort itself is actually a recreation of the original fort, but it was recreated in 1830, so it's still fairly old. And actually, this location, my cousin Barb Johnson she was a Métis woman, and she was a passionate historian, and was named the first woman ever to be a superintendent of this National Historic Park at Lower Fort Garry back in 1961, which is pretty incredible. So I think it's really important to kind of share a little bit about some of the territory that I'm coming from to speak to you on. And before we talk a bit about Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer identities and experiences, I want to introduce you to who I am and where my knowledge has come from. So, Tanchi Kiwao, Lucy Fowler de Shankashon, Winnipeg Dushchen, Maperendi Kayash, St. Andrews, St. John's, Red River, Oxford House, Norway House, Ireland, P. Orkney Islands, Oshuak, and Michif Dalamijunia. So I'm Lucy. I wanted to introduce myself in the Michif language, which is one of the traditional languages of Métis people. The language that my family spoke, Bungi, is effectively extinct at this point. And so although my family were not French Métis, I think it's important to learn and just say these words and bring this language into spaces as well. So as mentioned earlier, I'm a Two-Spirit Métis woman here from Winnipeg. My family took scrip just near that fort that I just showed you. I'll show you another map in a few moments that shows you just how close. But my family took scrip in those places, and then we're relocated into the city that is now Winnipeg. I'm a citizen of the Manitoba Métis Federation, an elected official of the MMF, serving as chair of the Two-Spirit Michif local, whose logo you can see there. I wanted to speak a little bit to these images. I think it's important to share a bit about who my family is and where my knowledge has come from when I'm speaking to you here. So on the top left image there, that's my family growing up. So my mom, Laura, who is a Métis woman, and my adopted dad, Calvin, my little sister, Leela, and me. And there's also a picture of myself with my aunts, my aunties and cousins on the right, as well as my dad, again, there on the right. So I also, while I'm not biologically related to Sioux Valley Dakota Nation, I think it's important to acknowledge the vast impact that my family from Sioux Valley has had on my ways of thinking and knowing and existing in the world. A lot of my teachings come from my dad and from my Auntie Muriel, who you can see laughing there in that picture in the middle. I spent many years, going out to Sundance and Merritt, BC, not too far from where all of you are. Yeah, that relationship was really special to me. And so this picture here on the bottom is from the Two-Spirit Michif local. That was our pride float last year when we were the second in the parade, which was really exciting as well. And of course, I can't speak without speaking about my little one as well. So I'm a relatively early career scholar myself. I finished my dissertation in 2022 when I was 8 months pregnant with my child, who is now, driving a lot of my work. So I've now find myself an academic, an auntie, a sister, a daughter, a community organizer, a rogue researcher, and a mom on top of it all. So a lot of my community work hasn't changed so much as intensified, but I really feel grateful that I'm able to bring my little one to these virtual spaces to give talks all over the world. He's been in Australia virtually, as well as other places in Europe and Canada as well. So I found with Miniwaka, which is the name that my dad gave him, or Asmar was the name that we chose for him, when he was born, really shifted me to thinking more about how I can really put all of my focus into my own community. So the Métis community and the Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer community. So I want to speak a little bit about my connection to the Métis Nation, as well as Métis people more broadly before I speak to Two-Spirit people. And I want to also just kind of reiterate that these communities and these identities are not separate, right? We are all of these things at the same time, but it's important to understand the context of these different pieces of ourselves as well. So I grew up in Fort Rouge, in Winnipeg, close to the river, but not quite on it. I spent a lot of time here at this house. This is a photo of my grandparents' house on Ashland Avenue, in Fort Rouge. So as I mentioned, my Métis side is on my mom's side, and my biological father's family was from Ireland. And there wasn't a time that I didn't know I was Métis growing up, intellectually anyway. My grandpa was a university professor, also at the University of Manitoba, and he was very proud of our family history, but it was mostly talked about as history. So as I mentioned, my cousin Barb was a historian of her own right, as superintendent of the National Historic Park at Lower Fort Garry, as well as she was once also the curator of the Hudson's Bay Company Museum. And so she had all of these stories and these artifacts in her home. Walking into her home was like walking into a museum because there was just things everywhere. And on the back of every photo or the bottom of every artifact, there was handwritten, scribbled notes about where this came from and the historical significance of these things. And she and her mother, Ruby, actually told a lot of family stories that I've more recently learned were taken up and written about in books like Many Tender Ties, if folks are familiar with that scholarship about Métis people. So they were recorded by non-Métis historians writing about our people. As I mentioned, I wanted to share an example of some of that historical knowledge. So that we spoke about, but I didn't really understand growing up. So for folks who know a bit about the dispossession of Métis land, this image might look familiar, or you might be able to kind of tell what's being shown here from just taking a peek. So this is a map that was published in 1875 by the Dominion Lands Office of Canada, which is of the river lots that were in St. Andrews and St. Clemens, Manitoba. So Métis communities were built around these river lots. You can see they're long and thin lots that connect to the river for many reasons. One being, of course, access to fresh water, but another being that your neighbors are close by, which really facilitated relationships within the community, being able to help each other with harvesting and planting and all of those kind of upkeep pieces, as well as keeping your family close by if your family were your neighbors. So on this map, you can see the red was places that there was agriculture or there were homes built. The green is the woodland areas, and the yellow was prairie land. And so there was a lot of woodland in this area and some agriculture, but mostly along the river. So if you know a bit about this history, the Canadian government decided to begin these land surveys after the Dominion Lands Act back in 1872. And so this land was surveyed to be able to be raised for farming and move settlers in once the land was taken from Métis families. And so this one, the survey itself happened in 1873. And you can also see the stone fort is here as well. Oh, sorry, right here, the stone fort. And then my family's community is just around here by the O. And so this is what the plan that was announced for St. Andrews a few years later. So this plan was drawn up in 1877. You can see the township boundaries that were created, as well as kind of the places where homes were going to be kind of cordoned off. And if you are at all familiar with St. Andrews, you'll now know that many of these lots are incredibly expensive homes that now rest on these lands. So these are when I grew up, I knew many facts about being Métis, or rather half-breed or Rupert's Lander, which were the words that my family used since we were Scotch Métis. But we didn't talk much about like what people consider Métis culture. I saw the stories being told about Métis people in school, about how we all jigged and played fiddles and spoke French, and I didn't see myself reflected in those stories. And so this experience actually has shaped a lot of my own research focus, which I'll speak a bit about. But I do, for those who don't know, want to make clear who the Métis people are, just so that that's in our minds as we go on to continue our conversation about Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer people as well. So the Métis are one of the 3 recognized Indigenous peoples in the Constitution Act in Canada. So this map here was created by the Métis National Council, I think in 2017, and shared out and shows the places where Métis communities and homelands were. A quick reminder that this map is not showing exclusive territories or lands that were just Métis lands, but these are the boundaries from where Métis communities came up and ones that were part of this kind of movement, this ethnogenesis of a people. So it's shared lands, not physical boundaries that were exclusive to Métis people. And so according to the Manitoba Métis Federation Constitution, which is the same definition MNC used, Métis is a person who self-identifies as Métis, is of historic Métis Nation ancestry, i.e. being able to tie back to these communities, distinct from other Aboriginal people, which means you can't be enrolled, you can't be both status and Métis at the same time, you have to be one or the other, and is accepted by the Métis Nation. And the Supreme Court of Canada also spoke in the Fowler case, the Fowler decision about self-identification, ancestral connection, and community acceptance are factors which define Métis identity for the purpose of rights under Section 35. And so I've mentioned a couple of times, and Susan did as well in my introduction, the Two-Spirit Michif local as one of the community groups. So I wanted to share this about the Métis, so that makes more sense as well. So in Manitoba, the Métis are governed by the Manitoba Métis Federation, which is divided up into 7 regions in the province. Each of those regions also has locals, which are kind of smaller grassroots groups meant kind of as advocacy bodies. And so back in, oh gosh, it must have been 2017, we started to kind of really advocate for creating a space that was a Two-Spirit specific space. There are lots of folks within the MMF who work really hard to advocate for Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer Métis people, but there was still a lot of resistance in a lot of spaces. And so we wanted to have our own space that was for us, by us, a safe place that we could advocate for our own needs and rights. And so we worked for several years collaborating with the Manitoba Métis Federation and the Winnipeg region. And then in 2019, we were able to finally launch the Two-Spirit Michif local with our first election, which was really exciting. So we had Nikki Ferlin, who was a PhD student. She was elected chair. Elder Charlotte Nolan was elected vice chair. Dr. Chantel Fiola was elected as secretary and treasurer. And now I am really grateful to be able to serve as the chairperson of that local until our next election in 2026. So the locals are just a really important part of the governance of the nation, but also just an advocacy body. We're able to provide a voice for our members if they have a concern in their community as well, to speak to people in a way that gives some authority and also lends some power behind it as well, right? That people don't feel like they're kind of on their own to tackle things in their workplace or in community. We're able to come as a body and speak up for them in a way that they didn't have previously. So I got my MMF citizenship back when I was in high school, and I had resisted doing it. As I mentioned, like I didn't see myself represented in things. For those who've been to Manitoba will know about the Festival des Voyageurs, which is a really fun festival in February where everyone wears sashes and dances to fiddle music. But I didn't see myself reflected in that space or in the Catholic Church or these stories of the Métis that I was hearing. But my mom told me to get my citizenship, and so I did. And so I ended up not really accessing Indigenous student spaces either during that time. And this all shifted when I moved to Thunder Bay. That picture there is of the sleeping giant in Thunder Bay. I moved out there to do my Bachelor of Education. And, while nobody has ever accused Winnipeg of being too tolerant, Thunder Bay's brand of racism was like really shocking to me when I moved there. And so in a way, this actually helped push me out of my comfort zone to spend most of my time in Indigenous specific spaces with community members because I felt so uncomfortable around non-Indigenous people. And so that's also the time that I was connecting with folks at the Métis Nation of Ontario who had a really strong presence at the university. I'm not here to talk about those current disputes between the different Métis nations at this moment, but in that work with them, I did learn a lot of these things that I saw as Métis culture, Métis skills like beading, jigging, kapot making, tufting, and all of these things that I had wanted to learn for so long. I also met some amazing scholars like Warren Cardinal-McTeague, who's a M&A citizen and now an assistant professor at UBC, just across the water from you folks, and doing some incredible work there. And so this time in Thunder Bay also helped me kind of problematize the essentialization of Métis identity and this conflation of cultural practices with community belonging. So I was really happy I knew how to bead and embroider, and the tiniest bit of Michif, that little introduction I gave, is fairly close to all of the Michif that I know. But I also knew that these were not the things that made me Métis. These are not the things that gave me citizenship within my nation. And I felt increasingly uncomfortable with this like performative historicization of Métis-ness that was happening. And this is also reflective of the simultaneous journey that I was having of not feeling queer enough in my early youth. I've written about this in a few different places, but one article that's currently under review at the Canadian Journal of Indigenous Studies, but I knew from a very early age that I liked both boys and girls. And I was first bullied and physically assaulted for liking girls in grade 4. And so at that point, that's when I kind of started to be a bit quieter about who I was and my identities out in the world. As I got older, that quiet translated to being told that I was just a straight girl playing when I wanted to date women. And so I kind of withdrew from queer specific spaces at that point. And it wasn't until later when I started to become more familiar, more comfortable with who I was within my identity as a Métis queer person, when those two pieces of myself were able to come together, that I was able to come more into myself. So Dr. Laura Forsyth, in her doctoral research, spoke with women that she called the grandmothers and aunties of Métis scholarship. So women who were trailblazers in Métis studies. And in that work, Laura wrote about the different ways these women were erased. And one was through invisibility, meaning that their work was rendered invisible through lack of acknowledgement and citation. She shares this quote from Jean Taillé, who was one of her, the people that she interviewed in her research. And Jean Taillé said, "The erasure happens in two ways. So you can either consciously or you can just self-select who you want to cite, kind of like how men cite men, and then over time, everybody thinks it was only men there." And this erasure and minimizing of Métis experiences has sparked a lot of my work. But it's also important to recognize that within heteronormative spaces like academia, Two-Spirit and queer voices are also silenced. But before we talk about that, let's kind of define those terms. So as I mentioned, when I was doing my master's, my bachelor degree, those are the times I was really coming into myself as a Métis person and claiming that identity. But it was also the time that I was coming into myself as a queer person as well, and coming to understand myself as a Two-Spirit person. So as I mentioned, I'd always known I was queer, but the term Two-Spirit, I wasn't completely sure about. Back when I was at Lakehead, I went to a conference in Dryden, Ontario. And at this conference, there was a presentation by a leading Two-Spirit scholar who talked about the history of Two-Spirit people. specifically pre-contact histories, and the ways that Two-Spirit were targeted by colonizers because we challenged their ideas of what's normal. And then after the talk, I went and spoke with them, and I found the presentation so beautiful. And as a baby queer, I really wanted to know if this term fit with me. As I said, I'd always used kind of like bisexual as the term, but it felt kind of shallow because it felt like it centered sex when that's not really what it was about. So when I spoke to the scholar, they told me that Métis people couldn't use Two-Spirit because we're not pre-contact. So it really shut down my use of that word and my connection to that word for many years, actually. It wasn't until I moved back to Winnipeg and went to this Métis-specific event that I heard Elder Barbara Bruce speak. So she was also one of the folks who founded the Two-Spirit Michif local. She spoke about Two-Spirit too, and I was starting to think, oh, maybe that term is for me, because it had felt so right with my identity that, you know, maybe it sparked back in me, like maybe that is for me. So after the event, I went up to Cook and Barbara and I asked her if I could use that word, and she said, "Well, are you queer?" I told her yes, and then she said, "Well, Two-Spirit's for you." So through sitting with Cookham Barbara and Cookham Charlotte Nolan, who I'll talk about a little bit later as well as my own PhD advisor, who was Dr. Alex Wilson, who's a legendary queer scholar from Opaskwayak Cree Nation, I started becoming more and more comfortable using and understanding the word Two-Spirit. And that term Two-Spirit actually holds a lot of significance here in Manitoba, where I'm speaking to you from. The organization that's now called Two-Spirit Manitoba actually formed back in 1986 with Barbara Bruce, as well as one of those folks forming it. And it brought community members together. And it was led by community members like Barbara, like Charlotte, like Elder Albert McLeod, who actually, if you don't know about Albert, they just received a Lieutenant Governor Award for historical preservation and promotion for all of their work in the Two-Spirit community, which includes forming the University of Winnipeg Two-Spirit Archives, which is an incredible resource with lots of online resources as well if you aren't able to make the trip here. So 2 years after that organization was formed, there was the first Native American gay and lesbian gathering held in Minneapolis. And then since then, it's been held yearly to different host communities. I think this year it's in Oklahoma. And it goes back and forth between the US and Canada because of not recognizing that colonial separation between our countries. It was here in Winnipeg in 1990 for the third gathering that the term Two-Spirit came up as something that could be used in the community. Folks have been looking for a collective term that they could use across nations, not because our experiences are the same across nations or even across different queer identities. As a cisgendered woman, I have different experiences, of course, than trans folks or non-binary folks. So it's not to say that we should all be collapsed into one category, but folks wanted a term that could be used to kind of consolidate and like a bringing together term that we could use to advocate for each other and have a larger collective voice. And so often in research done by anthropologists and historians at that time, they'd use the word berdache, which is a derogatory term to refer to queer Indigenous people in history. And so this shift to Two-Spirit was a way that we could have one word like berdache, but actually from us that could refer to our shared histories. And so that's why Cook and Barbara told me that that term was for me as a Métis person. The term is meant to be an umbrella for Indigenous queer people. And some people carry different understandings of the term, as I mentioned that Two-Spirit scholar earlier, right? For some, it means that you carry special ceremonial responsibilities. And there are other interpretations that are a bit problematic too, where folks say things like to be Two-Spirit means you have to have a little bit of a man and a little bit of a woman in you. Alex Wilson talks about that as being homophobic because you're saying the only way someone presenting as a woman might like another woman is to actually be a little bit of a man, right? Instead of erasing that identity. And so I prefer to let the term Two-Spirit stand alone and not talk about those kind of nuances there. Marie Liang wrote a really wonderful book. If you have not read it, it's a great one called Urban Indigenous Youth Reframing Two-Spirit out of their doctoral work. And this quote is from that book where they explain that the term Two-Spirit is often simultaneously used both as an umbrella term for all Indigenous people with complex genders or sexualities, and in ways that elide this breadth of meanings the term holds. So the collective can be positive and also can be negative, right? It's this collective understanding and advocacy that allows community to be created across nations. But also some scholars like Harlan Pruden, for example, tie the word Two-Spirit to historical roles that did exist in First Nations communities pre-contact, for people who inhabited third and fourth genders, and those carried specific roles and names in the language as well. So there's no one easy answer, sadly, for what Two-Spirit means. So it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So it's important to kind of recognize that people will share that in different ways. So as I mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit about my own research and my own research priorities as a Two-Spirit Métis person and what that looks like. And then I'll share a little bit about how I'm enacting these two priorities, as well as some recommendations afterwards. So the two pieces are Métis-specific scholarship and Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer inclusion and joy. I'm writing a piece, or written a piece, it's under review right now with Dr. Laura Forsyth and Dr. Jennifer Markides from University of Calgary about Indigenous umbrella scholarship and moving towards nation-specific scholarship. So when you think about Indigenous umbrella, that umbrella term can be helpful, right? As we mentioned with Two-Spirit, it can be a unifying factor. It can be a way to lift up voices together. But it does kind of create this monolith, right? Where people aren't recognizing the specific Indigenous nations from which these people's knowledges and cultures come. And for a long time, an umbrella in Indigenous scholarship was necessary because there was a scarcity in terms of nation-specific scholarship. People were working for a really long time to share their nation's stories and teachings, but often had to, at the behest of publishers or the academy, shift it to Indigenous or Aboriginal language to make it more accessible, right, to a larger audience. So this wasn't a choice that was made by folks alone. It was something often that happened that was kind of enforced on scholars. And this pan-indigeneity across kind of homogenous nations creates this one singular Indigenous worldview, which is not accurate, right? And so I'm doing a lot of work to create Métis-specific scholarship and also to help other Indigenous scholars in my institution, my grad students, create scholarship that lifts up their nation's voices and their nation's work as well. And the other priority is the Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer inclusion and joy. So Eve Tuck back in 2009 called for a move away from damage-centered research to lift up communities in a different way. So how do we center the joy in our communities and this incredible work that's being done? And this call for centering joy also comes from these two Métis Two-Spirit elders I mentioned, Cook and Barbara Bruce and Charlotte Nolan, who are some of the most incredible people who do this amazing work. As I mentioned, Barbara first became involved in doing kind of collective organizing for queer Indigenous people back in the 80s, and has hosted all of these international Two-Spirit gatherings in Winnipeg 4 different times. Charlotte is a Two-Spirit trans Métis woman and a 60 Scoop survivor who went through CFS and spent time in the justice system, and then now is able to use those experiences to advocate and leverage these experiences to help others. And they actually are both Sundance chiefs for the Two-Spirit Sundance, which happened for the first time last year, just outside of Long Plain here in Manitoba. And so there were over 400 people attending from all over the world, which was really incredible. And they were also the Grand Marshals of the Pride Parade this month. So they've been calling for more community building and more positivity and more joy within our work as well. So I want to give them some acknowledgement for that call too. So some of the ways that I'm honoring and lifting up Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer and Métis voices in my scholarship, and part of that work is addressing the erasure that Jean Tait spoke of, right, in the creation of Métis-specific spaces. So I've been part of creating several different Métis-specific spaces, and more are in the works, but one of those spaces is Mawachito Talk, which is on the left here, which is a Métis Studies conference, which was held in 2022 online and will be in the fall of this year in person. So it's a Métis-centered conference with Métis speakers, Métis community members, Métis artists, all speaking about the priorities of Métis people. And we have an incredible number of queer Métis scholars speaking at this event this year, which is going to be amazing, including talking about language, talking about ways that we lift up our own community work, and also having if folks have seen Teepee Confessions, they've sanctioned us to do Métis Confessions this year. So it will be a fun drag event at Club 200, and it'll be a really great time. So if you're in town and you want to come learn more about Métis scholarship and queer Métis scholarship, please do. We also have Powatimek, which was mentioned earlier, this Journal of Métis Thinkers, the first of its kind that's nation-specific. And so it's a place that we can lift up all of these community voices as equal to academic voices and show the diverse ways that our community comes to know things and share their knowledge. And the other community and scholarship focus is on Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer experiences. So I do this work through community, as we mentioned, chair of the Two-Spirit Michif Local, part of the Two-Spirit Métis National Council, and Two-Spirit Manitoba. But I do have several projects that I think are really relevant to the work that's happening at Royal Roads as well. So one project is at the University of Manitoba. I'm working with an incredible team of Two-Spirit scholars and community members on a project we're calling Queering Indigenization at the University of Manitoba. The other folks on the team are Melody McIver, who's an assistant professor in music, Elder Charlotte Nolan, who I've spoken about, Adrian Huard, who is an incoming professor in Indigenous studies, and then Desta Tatarin, Nikki Ferlin, and Sadie Lavoie, who are all queer community members at the university who are really interested in kind of advocating for more inclusive spaces. This work came out of conversations in community where folks were going to different events at the university held by having elders, do ceremony or do sharing circles, and then having these spaces end up being really harmful for queer folks in the space. Some elders and knowledge holders carry really gendered teachings. And a lot of rigidity in terms of, things like skirt protocols and other gendered seating arrangements during ceremony, these kind of things that perhaps folks might not recognize as being harmful unless you are a Two-Spirit or Indigiqueer person yourself. And then when hearing those things makes that ceremonial space or that knowledge sharing space immediately unsafe. So we wanted to create this project to be able to provide some guidance to the university on how they can do a better job at making sure that while we're, of course, indigenizing and adding, many positions, many projects, many hiring elders, how do we make sure we're doing this in a way that also creates space that's safe and accessible for queer Indigenous people too? So we're doing this through a series of gatherings and knowledge sharing opportunities. And we're going to come back with a report back in next May with these priorities and recommendations for the university to better support each other in this work. I'm also continuing my work with Dr. Alex Wilson. This screenshot is from a website that we're working on with the RISE project, which was led by Dr. Catherine Taylor. Looking at queer inclusion in schools and what students are experiencing on the ground. So they released several reports, including the Every Teacher Project, the In Every Classroom report. So several reports on the RISE, R-I-S-E website that are really relevant to this work. And then Alex and I have been working on creating an Indigiqueering space, where how are we creating a more expansive educational space? So part of this is developing a resource portal to be able to share Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer resources and lessons for educators that will be hosted here on this website. And then we're also designing a project that's going to be connecting educators and students to share those particular experiences. So that's still awaiting funding acknowledgement or funding to come through. So you'll hear more about that in the coming years. And feel free to connect with me if you're interested in learning more about that project. And the third major project I'm working on right now is a curriculum analysis. So I'm really lucky to have this team of incredible Métis students this summer helping me to analyze the Manitoba curriculum, specifically with two different lenses, one for Métis inclusion and one for Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer inclusion. So where is the inclusion? Not very many places. Spoiler alert. But then also, where could it be? Where are the places there's opportunity? Where could language be expanded? Where could things be included that didn't cross the mind of the curriculum developers? So it's a really exciting group to be working with, to be able to create these recommendations for the government as well, because they're the Manitoba government's engaging in rewrite of the social studies curriculum at the moment. So it's really apropos time to be working on that. And so I wanted to offer just a few early institutional recommendations that have come out of these various projects and this various research that I'm undertaking. And these are also recommendations I'll be writing on more fulsomely in the future, but things that maybe could be takeaways for now, and then please stay tuned for more in-depth scholarship on these topics as these projects conclude and are able to be mobilized. So the first is to include nation-specific work. So of course, as a Métis scholar, I am creating Métis-specific work, but I encourage all Indigenous scholars to continue enhancing the nation-specific work of their nations, as well as encouraging all non-Indigenous peoples to engage in practices with nation-specific scholarship, like citing specific nations, not lumping different nations' knowledges together. Sometimes in a literature review, we're finding, 10 different pieces and then putting them all together in one view, in one paragraph to kind of explain a concept, right? But how do we make sure that we're not conflating the knowledges of different nations? And perhaps, you might understand the difference. You might have engaged deeply with Indigenous community, but you can't assume that your reader will have the same depth of understanding that you do, right? So how are we making sure to make those distinctions explicit? And that goes for students as well, right? When you're citing in your courses, how are you making sure that the students understand the citation practices that you're choosing? Even if you're doing it from a very intentional place, that doesn't mean that they understand that intention unless you're being explicit with it. And this can also come to things like creating posters and event notifications for the university that speak specifically to the nations, to the membership of the nations, to the teachings that are provided and shared, to the safety of that space for queer Indigenous students or faculty or staff as well. Are these teachings that are inclusive of Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer identities, or are these spaces that they need to, either be aware might not be completely inclusive or avoid for their own safety, right? The second would be to ensure that Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer voices are at the forefront of everything, right? Of hiring, not just the people that you're hiring, but the people making the hiring decisions, to know what to ask in those conversations, to be able to make sure that when you're bringing on a new knowledge holder or elder to a space, how do you make sure that folks have similar orientations to the program or to the space itself? At the University of Manitoba, we established a sweat lodge just a year ago now. And so part of when Christine Sear, who's one of the sweat lodge keepers, and kind of the driving force behind the Sweat Lodge. She's also a Métis woman. When she was looking for people who would help be Sweat Lodge keepers and help provide ceremony in those spaces, that was one of the really important pieces, was asking in those initial conversations with knowledge holders what their perspective was about do women have to wear a skirt in your lodge? Do women and men have to be separate? How do people choose where they sit? These were explicit questions. And not to judge someone's teachings or tell them that they're wrong for their own teachings, but just to decide the people that you're going to engage with and bring in are people that are safe and create spaces that everyone can access. And then also within community development, so our community events, and curriculum development, we need to be hiring Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer people to create the curriculum, citing Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer scholars, bringing folks into your classrooms, assigning their readings, all of these pieces. And this last recommendation to design spaces, both physical and virtual, that are intended for Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer people, is informed by the calls to action that happened from, there was an event called the Call to Conversation for Two-Spirit and Queer Trans People of Color at the University of Winnipeg several years ago. And out of that came a book with several recommendations, which I would encourage folks to read if you haven't read that before. There's an entire section of recommendations for educational institutions about care and also ways to carry these out. So designing spaces, both physical and virtual, that are intended to means that we're inviting people in, not making accommodations after they're already in the space, but how do we make sure that any space that we create is intended to be used by Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer people. And so I hope that these early institutional recommendations are things that can be taken up in a fulsome way and things that might be useful in the redesign and the design of programs and services that are being created for students and faculty and staff at the institution. So I'm going to leave it there. It's a lot to take in. I know I just talked at you for 40 minutes, but it was a really lovely to meet all of you and share a little bit about my work. I wanted to share my contact information as well, because I'd be more than happy to speak with anyone afterwards as well if you have questions or follow-up. Or would like access to any of these resources I've talked about as well. So thank you so much, Marcy. It's been great to be here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fowler. We really appreciated that your presentation was fantastic, and thank you really so much. I was supposed to ask the first question, but we're a little bit behind time, so I'm just going to kick it over to the floor, and folks, please feel free to ask your questions of Dr. Fowler in the time that we have remaining. We have some questions. Monique, would you like to ask your question?
I think Ali was first.
Okay, Ali, do you want to go first?
Oh, please go ahead, Monique.
Hi, Lucy. I was just curious. You mentioned the word berdache, and how it was used for like Indigenous people who didn't fit between like men and women, or fit perfectly in between men and women. I was wondering if you ever heard a story about a white buffalo that was called berdache. I remember hearing that once upon a time, and I've never been able to find it again. So I was wondering if that came into your periphery throughout your work.
Thanks, Monique. Great to see you. I'm glad you could join. I actually have not heard that story, but I can put some feelers out and see if it comes up and then reach out to you if I hear anything.
Ooh, I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Ali, your turn.
Okay, hi, thank you so much for that. I just loved your joyful approach, and I think it's so beautiful that you are welcomed into that Two-Spirit term and your experience of it, and now you're extending that welcoming and joy. And I see that you are very good at holding two things at once, in that welcoming and joy for everyone, and also just holding the distinctness of where people come from and who they are. And that's gorgeous. And I actually would just like to hear what that book's name was again, talking about institutional, what recommendations and such, because I missed it. And I think that maybe not everybody is as well versed in some of these things that you may be. So
Yes, thank you so much for asking that, and thank you for those really kind words. I can drop the link in the chat if it will just
thank you.
let me copy. Is the call to conversation final report here from the University of Winnipeg. So I can't speak to how they've been enacted at the University of Winnipeg, but there's some really important recommendations for education and for other fields as well, for community members who aren't in academia as well. So it's a really beautiful read done by some brilliant people. So please feel free to share as much as you'd like as well.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions right now? I don't see one. Lucy, I'll ask you. I would love to know what the most surprising thing is that you have come across while you've been doing your research.
Most surprising thing. That's a good question. I guess for me, maybe the most surprising thing that comes off the top of my head is the similarity of experiences of queer. So I didn't speak to this, but in my doctoral research and this urban identity project that I'm working on since then, I've spoken to a lot of queer Métis people from across, living across Canada from the nations, but the similarity in experiences within institutions, within governing bodies, within their families, it was all such similar stories. And I was expecting a little bit more, maybe more acceptance in places like Toronto or Victoria, for example, people living in those places, but it didn't seem like that would be the case from what folks were sharing. So I think just that's where I kind of hold that duality of the umbrella being both benefit and also negative, because sometimes it does apply, right? And sometimes it is a way that we can share those experiences together and commiserate, maybe umbrellas are for commiseration in the rain. That could be a nice way of looking at it, but they also need to kind of go away sometimes as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I also I'm not sure if KD is still here, but I wanted to give KD a shout out. I saw them in the chat. They're one of the hosts of the Métis Confessions event this September and a very awesome queer Métis scholar as well. So I wanted to give them a little shout out.
Hi there. I came late. I thought it was at 10:30, unfortunately. My name is Bonaventure Fabian. I'm a Two-Spirit Red River Métis. I live in Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam territory here. I wanted to connect with some of you, but it's kind of late now. But no matter what, I wanted to know how I could listen to this recording, where I would get it or have access to it. And the other part of this, I've been part of this coming out, been in this Indigenous Métis community for over 30 years. And I started with, I don't know if you heard of Beverly Little Thunder's Woman's Sundance. I was a big part of that. I got lots of information to share with you or whatever wants to kind of find me out, and I could share. I got tons of stories because I was right at the beginning of all that. And I presently fast forward to this day where I live now. I've Sundance many years, and now I'm in a Sundance that's not Two-Spirit, but I got the space. I dance with the men, I sweat with the men. I can go anywhere I want at this camp. So I'm living and experiencing this change right now. So that's just a little bit because you're ending this. But please let me know how I can get to hear what you spoke about today.
Oh, thank you so much for those kind words. And it's so lovely to meet you. And I'll absolutely connect with you afterwards. I'd love to chat more about your experiences and learn from you and hear from you. So thank you for that. I think they put the link in the chat. So hopefully you should be able to see it there soon. Yeah, I will reach out. Maybe you could send me your contact information in a private message and I can reach out to you afterwards because I'd love to connect about that. Thank you.
Now, other questions? I don't see other questions. Callie and Lisa, am I missing anything? No? Well, maybe I'll just ask one more then of you, Lucy, as we kind of slide into 11 o'clock. But you gave us a really great list of some of the things that we can be doing in our institution. If we could choose one of those, obviously all of them need to be done, but what's the most important one from your perspective that we could choose?
That's tough, hey?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll kind of skirt around the question by saying specific spaces. So maybe it's nation specific, maybe it's Indigiqueer specific, but having spaces specifically for different groups of people and not expecting everyone to fit into the mold of one space that's created, but giving space and time and attention to the differences and the complexities of our nationhoods, of our identities, of our beings. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo Ali's comment about the joy and the love that you've brought into this presentation. It's just exceptional and such a really good feeling that I think that you're leaving us all with today. So thank you so much. And I'll just thank you for coming today. Oh, Ramonique has one more question.
I'm so sorry. I thought I had heard, Lucy, that you were going to put your contact information in the chat, but as I'm like scrolling through, I can't see it. That'd be cool. I'd love to connect.
Absolutely. I just threw my institutional email in the chat as well. So feel free, Monique or anyone else, to reach out to me as well. And I've got yours, Bonaventure, so I will send you an email. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Lucy. I'm going to pass it back to Alejandro now, and really appreciate you coming to speak with us today. Thank you so much.
So please join me to thank Dr. Lucy Fowler for such an amazing presentation. I think we are really privileged to have had the opportunity to learn about her research, her biography, and also such an amazing genealogy of the Métis people, and also the intersection between Métis identity and queer identities. I think I learned a lot today, and I hope that you have learned a lot as well, because we don't discuss these topics in such a level of specificity and singularity. So I'm really thankful for Dr. Fowler presentation. Stay tuned. Next week we're going to have another keynote speaker, and it's going to be also a very interesting presentation, I hope, and you're going to receive a calendar invite, all of you. So stay tuned, because you're going to be seeing this in your calendar soon. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, and please join me once again to thank Dr. Lucy Fowler for their presentation.